friends. Okay, so if you watched the last video, you saw that we had some technical difficulties. And we had to cut the video. Well, we didn't have to cut the video off. The video
actually
cut itself off.
Are you going to see it? Are we going to check it a couple of times? You may see one of us
go around and make sure it's actually recording. I don't want to have another 30-minute conversation and none of it recorded.
Good conversation.
It was good. I wish y'all had seen it. So we're going to try to reenact it the best we can. So we left off with which book? None Like Him. And so the next one was going to be my turn. And so for this one, we're going to talk about this book. It's called The Unfolding Mystery, Discovering Christ in the Old Testament.
And I ordered it.
Did you?
I did.
So she liked it so much that she ordered it immediately after. It's by a guy named Edmund Clowney. We haven't talked about him because I had not heard of him until this. So this book, if you like to read the Old Testament, but you struggle with how do I apply this?
Yes.
What am I supposed to learn from this story? This is a really good book to train yourself how to see Christ in the Old Testament. So each chapter is a different Old Testament story. And all of them are, here's Christ in this person in the Old Testament story. So we've got how to see Christ in Adam, how to see Christ in the seed of the woman, in Isaac, which is one of my favorite ones, in Jacob and Joseph. Joseph is one of my favorite ones.
I think you talked about the Isaac one.
I did talk about the Isaac one a little bit. So that one was the comparisons of seeing, and you may know some of this, but there's more in here. You would have to read it to know all of it. But seeing Christ in what Isaac did when Abraham and Isaac are going up Mount Moriah for the sacrifice. At this point, Isaac doesn't know that he is the sacrifice, but he's carrying the Bible specifically says he's carrying the wood on his back. So that's pointing us straight to Jesus, who will carry the cross on his back as he goes to the exact same spot where Isaac was supposed to be sacrificed. Is called Mount Moriah, and that's exactly where Golgotha was. So you have to have some history background, the Bible doesn't say that, but that's when scholars come in handy. But there's all kinds of other, when the angels finally tell him, don't sacrifice your son, and then all of a sudden a ram pops up in the background. God provided the sacrifice that was needed, just as God provided Christ as the sacrifice we needed. But it still points to the fact that ram is not enough to atone for the sins of all human beings for all times. We're still waiting on the better Isaac to come along. So there's all kinds of stuff.
Well, Isaac wasn't perfect.
Right. Well, he was still sinful. You can't be...
You gotta have the perfect
You have to have the perfect sacrifice. And that's what the sacrificial... We've talked about this before. That's what the sacrificial system pointed to. So you had to have a lamb that was less than 3 years old, that was spotless, perfect, blameless, You can't sacrifice a 3-legged lamb to God and think that that's enough. You can't do that. I think it's in 2 Samuel, David says, I'm not going to sacrifice anything that didn't cost me something. So, anyways, there's one in here, and I didn't talk about it in the last video. I mean, it got cut off, but you and I had talked about it. But it's called The Rock of Moses. I'm not going to go into that because I really want you to read it, but there's so much good stuff in there about that I just never... It's one of those chapters you walk away from and you're like, mind blown, I never saw that before, and no one's ever taught me that before. And so it's about the story of Moses striking the rock, the first time he spoke to the rock, which is what God told him to do, and then water pours from the rock. The second time the Israelites are complaining, he tells them to speak to the rock again, and he strikes it with his, actually I take that back. The first time God told him to strike the rock, he did, water came out. The second time, God told him to speak to the rock, and he struck it. Water came out, but that one little thing is why Moses couldn't go into the promised land. And it explains, you and I are like, my gosh, why? That's kind of strict penalty, And we know our gut reaction is to say, yeah, but that's how holy God is, which is true, but there's actually more of a reason of why that was a sin. And you have to read the chapter to find out that story is phenomenal. So anyways, this is really good. It talks about Joshua, Samson, David, the prophets, Solomon, all of that stuff. So this is the reason I love this book too, is because it actually taught me after I read it and I read Old Testament stories, I began to look for Christ in those stories, right? It's like training yourself to do anything, whether it's a marathon or anything else. You're building up stamina to do something. Same thing. I've trained myself how to look for things, when I'm reading an Old Testament story, oh, that looks familiar. I wonder if this is Christ in this one little section of the story.
Going back, I would say Jen Wilkin, going back to None Like Him, or going back to Women in the Word, what she would say about that, though, is read it first.
Oh, yes.
Read the story of
Interpret,
Moses.
comprehend, then
And
interpret.
then interpret. So, with something like that, it's like, I'm just reading the Old Testament truly through for the first time. This is not something that I would go, oh, while I'm reading this story, let me go read this.
Yes.
It's, let me read this.
Yes.
And know what happened and be able to kind of pull through that and then kind of come back and go. And that's a hard thing because I think so many of us want this first.
Oh, we jump
We
straight
want-
to applicant. Like, we
we
want to
want it- we
understand
wanna
it
understand it.
immediately.
Tell me.
And
I
not
wanna
work
understand
for it and wrestle with it.
Right,
That's what
so-
Jen Wilkin always says, wrestle with the text. Don't jump to a commentary. Don't jump to help. Try to figure it out on your own.
But it also means we have to be patient in reading and
yes.
reading and reading. And I'm not good at that.
I'm
Like
not good at that
I
either.
want it. I want this.
Well, and especially the reading part might come easy to somebody who has not read the Bible before. So they're reading it and soaking it in for the first time. But you and I are so familiar with these stories that it's almost mundane.
Well, I read
We've already
Jonah
read
yesterday.
those.
So I read the book of Jonah yesterday.
4 chapters. You could do it in one day.
I did. And I was like, you know, this is not the story that you
That
put
you
in
grew
your
up listening.
head.
I know.
And you read it and you go, I mean, I know Jonah. Like, I know Jonah.
I know
We've
the
known
whale.
Jonah since we were 3. We know
Uh-huh.
Jonah. And I'm like, not at all. And we don't talk about the fact that Jonah was still just
I
mad.
know. And angry at
Like,
God.
he was just mad. And I loved what it did kind of point out, and kind of this whole thing of how you point to Christ and how, like, what are you looking for? But I was like, yeah, we're all kind of like Jonah a little bit. You know,
Yeah.
like, God tells us to do something, we don't do it. But even further than that, we kind of feel like we don't want some people to know God. We don't want some
Agreed,
people to
yeah,
know Jesus.
like,
Like, you don't
I
actually
want-
deserve that.
I don't want anyone in ISIS being saved right now.
Yeah.
I want you to die in your sins.
Yes.
That's Jonah.
And so, you know, I would love if there's a pointing there, because I'm like, where? But that's a
I don't
great.
think Jonah's in here.
But it's a great thing to say. These are great ways to go back and go,
And find it, yeah.
hey, where is Christ in this?
Mm-hmm.
But you got to know the story first, and you can't go, hey, what I learned in Sunday school when I was 3 is what Jonah's about. Go read Jonah.
Go read Jonah. 4 chapters. You could read it in 20 minutes probably. But I love to, we were talking about Jen Wilkin, and Jen Wilkin has a podcast with JT English and Kyle Worley called Knowing Faith. They do it like once a week, and it's very theological in nature, but they're also hilarious, so I kind of love listening to them. But they talk about the Old Testament, and I know that we have some people that were in that class that love the Old Testament, and yet it's still one of those things that a lot of people don't read the Old Testament because they're like, that's old.
I'm going to call Allison Nelson out.
Yes,
Allison Nelson
she loves the Old
Testament.
So this is also like one of the reasons we stick away from the Old Testament is the books tend to be longer. Yes?
Yes.
Genesis, 50 chapters.
Yes.
Like nobody wants to. Why read Genesis in 50 chapters when I could read Philippians in 4? And the thing is, and this is what they say in their podcast all the time, if we're going to read the Old Testament in the eyes of the people that it was written to, we have to remember that those people's eyes had memorized the Old Testament.
Correct.
They knew how to look at everything that Christ did and pointed back to everything that was promised in the Old Testament and all those stories in the Old Testament. That's why we have books like Hebrews and stuff that are constantly pointing us back.
I think the Old
Old
Testament is hard
Testament.
too because the names are hard. I mean, I'm just real honest. Like, I'm in the middle of.
Jen
So I'm
Wilkin
doing a-
says you just wing it.
I'm
Just
doing the
swing it.
chronological reading right now, right? So I'm kind of, which is a fantastic way to read it. But I mean, I've been reading a lot of Second Kings and Second Chronicles. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm
Kings are
pretty
hard.
sure that I've already read about this king, except it's not Azariah, it's Amariah. But I'm sorry, there's an M and there's a Z, and they all look
They
the
all-
same. And then there are
Everything
these
ends in an H.
There are all these J kings
Yes.
that I don't know who you are, and are you a good king or a bad king? And so I
Everything
think-
starts with J and ends with H.
And they-
all
and-
of them.
And you see that repetition. You know, we talk about all the time. Jen talks about this a lot in her Genesis study about why is it so repetitive in language? Why does it say and then God and then why? Well, because it wasn't written. It was by speech that they were passing this on, and so in that repetition, it made it easy. Well, there's still repetition in talking about the kings.
Yes, yes.
You know, you read the king, and then it says he was good in God's eyes, or
Right.
he did right in God's eyes, or he was evil. I mean, you kind of know from the get-go, good dude, bad dude.
Yep.
And keep reading. But I think that's some of the hard part about the Old Testament, too, is some of that repetition. You're like, oh my goodness, why am I still going through all of these lines of people?
Genealogies.
Well, and Jen will say that it's really important for those genealogies
Yes.
because if they're named in the Bible, there's a
There's
reason.
reason it's there. Mm-hmm.
But I loved one time what she said at that conference I went to. She said, and sometimes it's just to remind you that everybody has a name in God's eyes.
Everybody matters.
And I loved that. I was like, this little bitty person that seemed to not matter had a name in God's
Had a name in
eyes.
the Bible.
So
I agree.
totally off topic, but this.
We're good at that.
But I'm scared. But I was scared of the Old Testament. This would make you maybe not as scared of the Old Testament, but also I just think
It helps you see the point of it. Like,
yeah,
because we're so tempted to think, well, that's old. We've got the New Testament. Why do we really need the Old Testament? We've got the New Testament. I mean, you don't see God working in his fullness. You do not get a full picture of God. We don't get a full picture of God on this side of heaven anyways, but you just can't get that fuller picture when you're just reading half the Bible. And it's not even half. Like, the New Testament's only like, what, 27% or something like that? And there's so much more. So, anyways.
Good
Old
choice.
Testament, great book. All right, Abby?
Okay. And we realized I stole this from Marcy last week, so I'm going to give it back to her in a minute.
Yeah.
I didn't have my copy. I'd given it away. It's called This Momentary Marriage by John Piper. We had to have a John MacArthur. We had to have a John
Gotta have all the
Piper.
Johns.
Like, these things happen.
I'm going to make sure it's still recording.
Please do. Because I'm going to be upset if it doesn't.
We're good.
So I read this book. Marcy has read this book. I have actually gotten my mom to read this book. I have gotten my sister-in-law to
Justin
read this
read
book.
it.
Matthew has read this book. So then you go, hey, you're talking about all these people who are married. So if I'm not married, this is not for me. And I would actually say if you're not married, this is absolutely for you. It is for married, not married, want to be married, have been married.
Scared to be married.
All of these people. And what it is, and the reason I say that is because when we look at marriage, we see marriage as man, woman, married relationship, end of story. And what John Piper says is absolutely not. Marriage is absolutely a picture of Christ and his church. Marriage is absolutely about covenant. And you need to know that what you're doing in marriage is bigger than just husband and wife. And I love that. I'm actually going to throw something else in there as I say that. I'm right now reading a book called Parenting by Paul David Tripp.
Yes. She bought this when we went to Lifeway at the end of our last video.
I bought it and
That's what she
I'm almost through it. I was hoping I was going to be through it. And these two very much parallel in the idea of your job in a marriage or your job as a parent is a Christ-appointed role to be an ambassador.
Yes.
And by the way, you don't have control. And by the way, it's not performance-based. And by the way, if you can't see why you need Christ out of these relationships, then you're missing the point.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is really what this book was about. I'm kind of going through some chapters. It does have 2 chapters about being single, actually. It has a chapter about, okay, what happens if I am divorced? Because I don't want, the name of the chapter is What God is Joined Together, Let Not Man Separate, the gospel and the divorced. And he talks about grace, he talks about mercy, he talks about repentance, he talks about restoration. So, again, I don't know if y'all remember me pointing out all of Marcy's drawings, but, I mean...
Okay, drawings is a weird word to use.
Well, she's very much like me, though. Like, I circle things, and I underline things, and I star things.
Use different colors.
But what he basically does, this is the chapter that got me.
It has the most writing.
It has there were 2 chapters that got me. One was this one right here, chapter 5, Pursuing Conformity to Christ and the Covenant. And it talks a lot about nagging.
Oh my goodness, that was.
Do you remember that chapter?
Yes, I wrote it up on my mirror.
So 1 Peter 3:2 is what he refers to, but it says, without a doubt, without a word means don't badger him. Don't nag him. Be as wise as a serpent and as innocent as a dove. Discern whether any word would be heard. Mainly, Peter says, try to win your husband by your respectful and pure conduct. And he just talks about, he just tears you up. Like, hey, if you're nagging your husband, you're not doing the submissive thing well. We talked a lot about that the last time, that I really struggle. There's a chapter about what submission means.
Oh, yes.
And what that looks like in a marriage, but how that reflects Christ and the church and your submission to God. And that one really got me because y'all all know me well enough to know I'm very strong-willed. I'm very independent. I very much have looked at my husband multiple times in our marriage and said, I don't need you, I choose to need you, and how wrong that is.
Yes.
But why is that wrong? And not only why is it wrong in that covenant relationship of marriage, but what am I reflecting to the world? What am I reflecting to my children? What am I reflecting about Christ in that relationship when I'm standing up and going, I will not submit? What does that say? And what does that reveal about my heart? And so I just loved over and over again that that what John Piper says is, this is what marriage is about, but it's about something so much bigger than husband and wife. And I also talked about before, I loved that the introduction was done by his wife.
Yes.
Because she's about as real as they come about it. And she's like, hey, by the way, we don't have this thing down pat.
No marriage is perfect.
And we have been doing this a long time, and we're going to tell you that you struggle, and there's valleys just like there are peaks. And
you know what, I love the way she talks about it too, and I feel like we need to do this more in marriage. This social media world where we have to pretend that our marriages are perfect and they're wonderful and there's no problems with it and we're just hunky dory.
He's the best thing that ever happened
right.
to me.
And Noelle was like, no, like we needed the grace of God to stay married 70 years, like
yes,
or however many
absolutely.
years. And that's a good lesson for all of us. Like, we need the grace of God to get through this. Don't you be bragging about how awesome your husband is, because none of us should be doing that. It is grace of God alone that gets us
and that's
to marriage.
That's what Paul David Tripp even talks about
with parenting. Yes,
it's the same thing. But also, I think in going with that, and if y'all know me well enough to be raw and real, like we need to be raw and real with each other. And I don't mean
talk bad about your husband to your friends,
or put it all over Facebook. Let me tell you what happened with us today, because I'm being raw and real, and I'm going to tell you, here's what really goes on. Well, yeah, it does.
But the world doesn't need to see that.
Exactly. But you don't, that's actually a very private thing. And when I talk to you about my husband and I say, we're really struggling with this, it is not a he's struggling with. It is not a I am struggling with. This is where we are struggling, and this is where we are having a hard time. And I think we've talked about this before. God really makes you, I believe, prepared for things coming up, the sovereignty of God. And I told you I read this, and then Matthew kind of made this huge job change, and Matthew kind of made this huge change in our life. And I have had to go back to this over and over.
What's funny, this keeps happening to you, because right before Matthew got sick,
right, absolutely,
same thing happened to you.
Absolutely. And I think God knows how your heart works, and God knows how to speak to you, and you have to trust that. But you also have to go back, and this is where I really have to work and thank God for that.
Oh, yes.
Like, you have to go back and go, God, I had no idea when I was reading this momentary marriage that you were preparing me for something in my marriage. And also, you have to not look hard for it at the moment. You have to be able to go back. So, like, I am reading this parenting book right now, and I mean, I will, in my honesty, say Marcy knows probably better than anybody. We are really struggling with parenting right now. And so probably, am I picking up this parenting book going, help me because I'm struggling? Yes. But every book you read, or every sign you read, you don't need to go, okay, God, but what are you telling me?
Her realness to tell us that should make all of us parents feel better too, because she's a pediatrician. If she's having
failing at the parenting thing,
then it's okay that I'm having problems too.
Well,
it gives me permission.
Well, and that's what this does too. What it says is, but you have to be humble.
Yes.
And you have to be broken and say, I am broken, and I am broken in a marriage. I'm not whole. I can't be whole. I'm a person. I'm a sinner. I'm gonna fail in my marriage, in my parenting, in my jobs, in my friendships, and I have to keep coming back and saying, that's where I'm coming from, but that's where they're coming from too.
Right.
And that's what I love in this and in this parenting book. It talks about, like, I love the fact it's like, when you yell at those little sinners, you're yelling at those little sinners because you're a sinner.
Because you're a sinner.
And what you're seeing is that you are coming from the same place they are. Anyway, I just love this book, and I felt like it was truly, in looking back, God going, Abby,
get ready.
Where is your marriage? What is your marriage standing on? What is your marriage standing on? Because if it's standing on having trips together a couple of times a year so that you have you time, being able to have conversations every night after the kids go to bed, having, time together that makes you grow all the time. If that's what your marriage is standing on, you're about to have a rough ride.
Yeah.
But if your marriage is standing on something bigger than that, and if you see this picture bigger than that, then y'all are gonna not coast through this, but y'all are gonna both be able to kind of come back and go, how is this gonna make us reflect Christ? And
Right.
Matthew and I have had that conversation multiple times in the last 6 months. This struggle or this situation or this business, how is this gonna make us reflect Christ? And John Piper nailed it.
And I wrote something on here. You can end on that if you want. But what she's saying in this chapter 3, it's called God's Showcase of Covenant Keeping Grace. And my little note that I wrote at the top, it says, forgive and count your spouse as righteous when he's not, because Christ did that for me. That's the whole point, is don't hold grudges, don't bear things. I mean, you're a sinner, he's a sinner. And count him as righteous when he's not, because that's what Christ did for
Well,
you.
it's all about grace, and
Yeah.
and that's what this Paul David Tripp book is a lot
I need
about.
to read
And,
that next.
well, and it's really good, and I've totally gotten off topic by talking about it, but it's really good because you're not gonna love it, because I don't love it.
Right.
As far as it's not a checklist. Hey, Abby, you're having trouble with this, so do this, and this,
Yeah.
and then it's gonna
Then
be
it's gonna be
fixed.
fixed, yeah.
That's the whole point. Parenting,
Quit it with the
marriage,
checklist.
you can't fix it. It's a long-term, repetitive issue because we never can fix our sin. And we daily have to get up and say, I'm in this marriage and I'm a sinner and he's a sinner, and I'm going to start out with grace and mercy because that's where Christ starts out with me. In parenting, it's the same way, and I love that it talks about you're never finished parenting, that you think you ship them off
Yep.
and you're done and you've taught them everything they need to know, and by the way, we're never a finished product. Why would we think they are?
Right. I love that she said that too, because I went to dinner with Shannon last night, and Shannon was talking about how they brought Hannah back from college, and they were having issues with that. And she said the statement exactly what you're talking about. She was like, every time you get through a parenting state, like you keep thinking, if I could just get him to this age, and she's like, I have a college person in my house and it's still an issue. Like it's always going to be an issue. It's never going to stop.
But I just love that thing of, I mean, in marriage, in friendships, I'm not finished, you're not finished. And so we kind of have to
Till
go
we're dead,
through
we're not
those
finished.
relationships. So,
Yep.
you're next. I think you have 2.
Yes, okay, so these kind of go together, but I just counted them as 2 separate books because they are 2 separate books. They don't really go together. I'm just saying they go together because I feel like they go together. So I got 2 Old Dead Dudes.
Got it?
This one is by J.C. Ryle. It's called Holiness. It's a pretty basic title, but I mean, I guess it's technically called Holiness. Its Nature, Hindrances, Difficulty, and Roots. And the foreword's by John MacArthur. We said that last time, although that cut off. I was like, I didn't even know that the foreword was by John MacArthur.
But of course it is.
And so this one's called Holiness. So the whole point of this book is that verse in Hebrews. Ooh, did we look it up?
I got it. Tell me. Oh gosh, hold on.
I don't know.
Remind-
It was 12.
12:4 maybe.
Yeah, that sounds
I'm
about right.
going there. Keep going.
Anyway, so this whole book is about holiness, and we have this tendency to kind of, once we become Christians and we grow a little bit in our knowledge of God, we almost get to a point where it's like, okay, this was the ultimate goal, to be where I'm at. I'm praying, I'm reading my Bible, I'm going to a good church, I'm doing all these things.
Remind me the gist of the verse, because that's what I had to look
Without
up.
holiness, you will not see the Lord.
Got it. Keep going.
So anyways, and this book is it's a difficult book to read because he just nails it. I mean, he talks about holiness in a way that I had never thought about holiness. We should be growing in knowledge. Yes, we've talked about that in our class a lot. We needed to grow in knowledge. But as we do that, we also need to grow in holiness. In other words, we need to be sinning less and less and less as we conform more and more and more to the image of Christ.
It's 12:14.
Okay.
Make every
We were
effort.
close.
We had a 4.
Yeah.
But 4 was not it. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. And I love, because always look at verses after it, right?
Yep.
15 says, see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. So it's laying out the big picture, and then it's going to get very, it goes on, but it gets very specific.
Hebrews
like,
is good.
how are you going to do that? Like, without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Well, what does that have to do with you? Because, we go back and go, well, I'm a sinner, and I can't be holy, and I can't, what am I supposed to do with this?
He has a lot of messages in here. Like, I have a lot of writing just in general in here. I clearly do that a lot, but this one really has a lot because I just learned so much from it. A lot of times in here, I've got this whole page blocked off, and I'm not going to read it, but I'll tell you what I wrote under it. It says, message to nominal Christians, or message to content or stagnant Christians. So he basically rips us apart if you're being stagnant in your faith and you're not growing in holiness. It's a very, very good book to spur you on to be better, not morality, I'm not talking morality, but in conforming to the image and cutting off those unfruitful branches. And I will say, after I read this book too, it changed the way when I enter into certain situations, because we can't always hang out with Christians. We're going to have to eventually hang out with people that are not of the Christian faith, and that's a good thing. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. But this helped me as I hang out with people, because I'm sure I'm not speaking just to myself. When I hang out with people that don't have problems cussing, drinking, talking negatively, slander, all that kind of stuff, it is much easier for me to soak into it than it is if I'm hanging out with my church friends. So I have gotten to a point where this is something that, like, I will pray for the grace of God to be able to stay holy, to not be affected by certain conversations, certain people, that kind of stuff. So this changed the way I pray about a lot of stuff like that too. But it's a very, very good book. It's really not too long. It's a short book. I don't know if you can see it. It's like 250 pages. But it's just so chock full of really, really, really good information. And Ryle is one of those people that just words it so well. This is not one that, I read it in 8 days. I always am, just side note about me.
I've already seen this, by the way. What she's about to tell you is a real Marcy thing. Like, it's real.
Super OCD.
And I laugh about it, but I think I think it's really cool, because when I talk about, like, things that, what you're about to say, when I talk about, gosh, I was reading that, and then the situation happened
in life, yeah.
And this totally prepared me. I'm like, that's actually not a bad idea, so here you go.
When I read a book, I know you cannot see this from here, because in that video you were like, look at Marcy's writing. I was like, I can't see it.
There's a lot, y'all.
But this is, I write the date that I began reading the book, and then the date that I finished reading the book. And what she's saying, a lot of times I do that other than my OCD purposes, but also because when I write a lot of stuff in my prayer journal and I notice a change, I think I'm going to want to go back and be like, what was I reading then? Like, what was going through my mind then? So that I can come back and be like, oh, I was reading this book then. And so...
I write dates in my kids' Bibles. So, I have the Bibles
my grandmother used to do that.
That I'm praying for them, and not doing it well right now. But
yeah, I
write the dates that I'm praying those verses for my kids, with the idea that when I give them this Bible, they're going to go, well, goodness, in 2019, Mom was praying 1 Corinthians 10:31.
That's a really cool thing.
Why was she praying that for me? What was happening then?
Your kids are going to love that.
Well, at some point in their life, they may. I don't really have this grandiose idea that I'm going to hand them this at their high school graduation. They're like, this is the coolest gift ever.
Yeah.
No, they're going to be like, you're so weird.
Maybe wait until, like, they have their first child.
And, but then I feel like that's where they're going to kind of, later they will go, hey, that's okay. But that's where I do dates. But this is actually a pretty fantastic idea.
This is one of my favorite chapters in here. Is called The Fight, and it's about the fact that we have to fight. Sin is something that is deadly, it is terrible. The next book's by John Owen, and he was famous for saying, kill sin or it'll be killing you. Ryle went around the same thing. This whole section is about the fight, and it talks about spiritual warfare. And he lists out 3 things that we have to fight. We have to fight the flesh, we have to fight the devil, and we have to fight the world. And obviously we don't mean, like, fight.
It would have not been funny if you had actually...
I think it would have been fantastic.
We would have had to stop the video momentarily.
But it's how to fight well. So just really, really good, very inspirational book on. Inspirational is a terrible word. It's a convicting book. But it's a convicting book.
You don't walk away going, Marcy is awesome.
Oh, I'm fully inspired now, and I just feel like I'm a better Christian because I read that. No, I'm like, I feel like I should be going to hell. Is what I feel like. So that one is coupled with the next one that I had mentioned. It's called, along with Spiritual Warfare, The Mortification of Sin, Dealing with Sin in Your Life. It's by John Owen, old dead dude. This old dead dude at least wrote in a way that it was not quite as broken English, and it was a little easier to understand. This old Old Dead Dude did not.
Okay.
But his foreword is by J.I. Packer. Many of us have probably heard of him. And he, I think, edited it a little bit to make it a little easier to understand. So this is still one, it's a very short book. It's very small. It's like 140 pages. And so it was a quick read, but it is one of those reads where there are some sentences I had to either look up a word or I had to read the sentence twice to really make sure. You know what they were not good at? This is what it drives me nuts about Paul and about just Old Dead Dudes. Run-on sentences. Just put a period. Or maybe a colon.
Okay, but they were just talking.
I'm just saying, this guy was writing though.
Like, but I'm just saying, like, if someone were to take this video and put it in a conversation,
right? But still,
it would be a lot.
It's that's just the way they wrote back then. So I know my teachers are like, yes, we cannot stand run-on sentences because it is very hard to lose. It is very easy to lose the track of thought. Where are you going with this? And Paul, especially in Romans, king of run-on sentences. So anyways, this whole book.
Paul does that because you're already confused, so you just feel better about it.
Well, it's almost like, if you think about, I'm not comparing myself to Paul, just so I say that.
We love Paul.
When I would teach, y'all always made fun of me because I would be teaching and then I'd go off this way and then I'd come back and then I'd go off this way. And Laura Lee, I remember Laura Lee would always be one to quickly say, stay on track, you're losing me and I can't figure out where you're going with this. Paul did that a lot, and it happens when you're so zealous and you're excited about what you're talking about, and it really takes training. That's why teaching is not for everybody, because y'all joked with me about that, but that was a true teaching moment for me. Like, I have got to be careful if I teach again, how I have to structure the way I teach a little bit better, not just all over the place. So, all right, sidetracked. We're getting sidetracked as we're talking about getting sidetracked. Anyways, I began this one at the end of July of 2018, finished it August 10th, 2018. This whole book is
Y'all, for real, it's in every one of her books.
All of them. This one's based on Romans 8:13. Are you going to read it for us?
Oh, I'm gonna.
The whole book is based on this one verse.
Hold on. This is why I don't like having my Bible on my phone.
I know I meant to bring mine down here, but that's a lot of books.
Because then I have to look it up. 8:13. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live.
So the biggest takeaway I got from this book and that verse, I've heard that verse 1,000 times, but I didn't really get that section of the verse where it says, but if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the flesh.
You're not doing it by yourself.
You're not doing it by yourself. And she's already talked about do this, check all these things, and then you'll be a better parent or you'll be a better spouse if you do this. That's what John Owen's trying to fight and saying you can't do it yourself, because even if you check everything off that box or everything off that list and then you're the perfect spouse for Thursday, Friday you're going to suck again. Like, that's just the way it works. And so if you're doing it, we don't have the power to kill the flesh in and of ourselves. We have to use the guidance of the Spirit.
But the flip side is, and we have to be, it's a fine line. You don't get to excuse yourself either.
Right.
Because we do have the Spirit.
Yes.
And so you don't get to say, well, I'm just a sinner, so it happens.
Right.
No, I'm sorry, that's actually not okay.
Yes.
And I think this would call you out on that too. Like, sin is so bad, and we make it so good. We're actually going to talk about that at the end. But I just, I think some days we give ourselves a little too much grace and mercy and say, I'm just a sinner. Like, that's just who I am. You are, but you have the Spirit of Jesus Christ in you, and that doesn't make it
That's not okay, yeah. I think it was A.W. Tozer that says a true Christian judges himself harshly and others lightly, whereas a fake Christian, or probably not mature Christian, judges others harshly and himself lightly. That's always struck me, because I have never been good at judging myself more harshly than I'm judging somebody else.
Correct.
So good quote to remember. But so that's what this book does. It just kind of talks to you about how do you mortify the flesh? How do you get rid of sin in your life? And the reason I love this book so much is because it really changed the way I prayed. After I read this book, I began to actually...
What a good read!
We're going to lead into praying life in a second. But after I read this book, it made me realize every single day I have to ask the Lord for help to mortify the flesh. Like if you go read my prayer journal after August 10th, 2018, you will probably see a change in me saying, God, I can't mortify this flesh on my own. I need you to do it. This is the particular sin I'm dealing with right now. I'm yelling at my kids too much. How do I do this? I can't do it alone. I need you to help me do this. Please give me the grace and mercy to stop yelling at them today, like one day at a time.
This morning.
This morning. This 1 hour before we go to school. And so it really changed the way that I prayed. And so I'll say this because I wrote this. This is a good chapter, and this is something I wrote at the top. It says, know your sin and how the devil uses it to entice you. That's the first step in mortification. So what he talks about in this particular chapter is before you can mortify or even ask the Lord to mortify, you got to know what to mortify. Identify what sin is really, really you're struggling with, and then look and figure out how is the devil trying to use this against me. And once you figure that out, then you can really fight it with the Lord's help by the Spirit. And go for that, because that's the biggest thing is being able to identify it. And we have so many churches and people that say, oh, we shouldn't talk about the devil too much, and we don't need to talk about how the devil works. And that's, Charles Spurgeon always says, that's just terrible strategy. Like when football players play a game, they spend the night before looking at the videotapes of the opposite team. Know the enemy,
Just
know
age
his
yourself.
strategy.
They don't watch videotapes anymore for those of y'all under the age of 30.
Oh, what do they do now?
Well, they're not tapes.
Oh, well,
I don't know
whatever.
what a videotape is.
I was thinking the movie We Are Marshall, like, you know, when they watch the
Oh,
videotapes.
they call it film, but yes.
Films. Oh yeah, they have little projectors. It's good. 60s. I was not alive then. In case you didn't know. Anyway, but yeah, that's what I just loved about this, because it gave some really helpful ways. I've been trying to do this by myself all this time, and it's no wonder I'm failing at it, because I'm not doing it the right way. So this was a really good book on how to do that.
So the comment at the
Same guy, J.I.
Yes.
Packer.
So a praying life is my next one. Actually, I guess I'm going to do two back to back so that you can do
Yes,
one and I can do one.
and I'm going to check the video again.
So, yeah, please do, because that was very sad.
We're going.
A Praying Life, Paul E. Miller. So I got this book after Matt Chandler.
Yeah, but they have all talked Matt,
J.D.
Greer, everybody's talking about
Somebody
this
else has said, hey, I read this book, and I was like, well, hey, if these people, I don't think
That was Garrett.
If they do, it'll be all
We
right.
just heard a really loud
So we should read this book, and y'all know I love prayer. We should all love prayer, but y'all know I love reading about prayer, and so it's called A Praying Life, Paul E. Miller, and what we were saying is J.I. Packer, who edited and kind of wrote the forward on that, wrote on the back of this, honest, realistic, mature, wise, deep, warmly recommended. Paul David Tripp wrote a book on prayer that actually makes you want to pray. So this book is about as real as they come about prayer. Paul Miller has a special needs daughter, and the whole book is kind of based on her and his struggles parenting her, and how that basically made him realize that what he had to do in prayer. And I have circled, Marcy can tell you, I'm also a writer and a circler, not as much as her, but I have circled and written in here what, just kind of what he says, and the things that I love in here. He has all these diagrams.
Yeah, there's a lot of diagrams.
Like this one I loved.
I haven't
Like
gotten
there's
that
this
yet.
road that talks about not asking, like you and God and good asking is like a road, and how do we deter from those, and why do we deter from those? And basically what he says is your life, it's not a praying moment, it's not a praying hour, it's a praying life, and how all the time you should be praying, but what does that really look like, and how is that continuous? And I said this in the last video, and you can't see it at all, but he truly has index cards that are his prayer cards, and at the top he has the person's name, and it's usually a person or more than a situation, because even in that situation he's going to name the people. And then he has a verse, and y'all know I've talked so much about praying around verses. I do that very much for my children, and should get better about it with my other situations. But he takes that person, he puts a verse, and then he prays up underneath it, like whatever it is they're struggling with or whatever, and he'll add to it as they go. And he'll also write dates beside it when it's answered. but he has assigned days of the week to things.
people.
And I think that is what is so cool because it's not as overwhelming. And I love this quote, if you're going to enter this divine dance we call prayer, you have to surrender your desire to be in control, to figure out how prayer works. So he's like, as much as I like try to organize it, make it look pretty, and you know, hey, by the way, at the end of the day, I have to realize that I just need to pray. But he'll take these cards and like his friends, he may be praying for on a Wednesday. So they're like certain things that he prays for every single day, obviously. Mm-hmm. But then it may be his friends on a Wednesday. It may be his church on a Thursday. It may be missions on a Friday. And every week he has these cards lined up. And he will sit down with these cards, and that's kind of how he prays. And I love that idea because I think, I mean, as much as we get sidetracked in these conversations, I get that sidetracked in prayer.
Yes.
Like, I'm like praying, and then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I got to go to Target, and I got to, oh, wait, God, okay, I got to come back, and I'm praying. Oh, wait, I got to, you know, and then we feel guilty because we're supposed to be praying, and we're running all over the place, and he kind of frees you from that because he's like, okay, so then you're like in Target. Well, wait a minute. What do you need to be praying for in Target? Like, you can kind of turn this into something where you're
you
running
don't have
around.
to have like a 45-minute prayer session on your knees in your closet. I mean, that's his point too. Is
Correct.
When I'm going through Target and
There's
I think
something-
of somebody I need to pray for, God will honor that 30-second for that one person, and then do that throughout the day. And so that's why he calls it a praying life. This is something that you.
But do. I do love in this book, as much as I would say that Paul David Tripp book is not this. He is a little bit.
Yeah.
And he talks so much though about his special needs daughter and how she humbled him in so many ways, and how part of the reason that we struggle with prayer is our pride.
Yeah.
And our not understanding. Well, I'm praying, but I'm praying because I'm supposed to. I'm not praying because
I'm at the
humble.
part where he talks about we need to quit trying to figure out how prayer works. It's not our job to figure out how prayer works. Just pray and let the incomprehensible Almighty do the working of the prayer.
I mean, he has all these great quotes, and again, he's got all these diagrams. Like, if you're a math person or an engineer person, or you're gonna love it, and you're gonna be like, oh,
that makes sense now.
That
when you
is
see
good.
it in a visual diagram. Yeah.
It just it's amazing. I mean, this quote with my kids: until you are convinced that you can't change your child's heart, you will not take prayer seriously. And the idea behind that is we are not responsible for our children's hearts, and we are not responsible for our children's souls. And by the way, when we give ourselves that credit, we discredit God in so many ways. That is like pride upon pride upon pride upon pride. And that's true of any situation in our life, but that's where he talks about the humility of prayer, that we realize I don't get to control this, and until I can go to God and go, I surrender. And I have circled that word so many times in the last 3 weeks. What am I really surrendering? So A Praying Life, Paul E. Miller, I do highly recommend it. I would not tell you it's an easy read.
Yeah.
But
it's a long book too.
It's very long. It's hold on.
It's taking me a while. You should see the dates in front of it. It's taking me a while.
274. It's 274 pages, but then there's an appendix, and in the appendix he
it's
breaks down
yeah.
like how to do his note cards, and he doesn't say. I will say this: when I say there's so much direction, he doesn't say this is the only way to pray. His point is this is how I figured out how to pray, and how I kind of figured out a system. And you have to have some intention in your prayer. Like you can't. Yes, you can take those moment by moments, but you've still got to have some intention in it.
And I'll say this too. I'm throwing out another book here. I'm not talking about it. But when you said the thing about we are not in control of our children's salvation and their hearts, like that's just not our job. There's another book by J.I. Packer, and it's called Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God. It's a very short book, but he talks about evangelism, like preaching the gospel to other people, and how freeing it is. It is not our job to save anybody. That makes life so much easier for us when all we have to do
is talk
about Christ and what happened and let him take care of the person's heart. That is not our job. Our job is not to convert. Our job is to witness. That's it.
Hey, can you walk that up there so they can see it? Because they're not going to be able to see it back
Yes.
there.
Are we doing this one now?
That's my next one, and
Okay.
we're doing that one. So I talked a little bit about this one in books that I wanted to read. It is called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. And the... not sequel. What am I going to say? The next book to this is None Like Him. No God But One. I have read books. Clearly, I don't know the titles. This book was amazing to me. This is very much an apologetics book. This is very much. So what it is how this guy converted.
Yes,
It
good
is
story.
his story, and I think you and I talked a little bit about last time, and what was important to me out of both of these books, but this book was how, in talking about converting people, in talking about evangelism, it is all about relationships.
Yep.
And basically, this guy formed a 4-year relationship before Nabil was ever considered to be converted, and he was willing to talk about tough questions and answer tough questions. And the other thing that I loved about it was he didn't know all the answers, and he didn't say he did. And so when Nabil would go to David and say, explain this to me, David wouldn't be like, well, I don't know the answer, so that clearly either I'm not a Christian or I don't know, or that's not important. It was, let me go back and figure out what that answer is and get back to you. And they had this very mutual respect. And we talked about last time in talking about evangelism and in Christianity, you don't have to feed on emotion. That so many times we're like, I'm going to get to you by making you feel guilty or shameful or scared. I mean, how many kids are converted because they don't want to go to hell?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Fire insurance.
I am going to be saved so that I don't go to that place that they keep describing as hell. While that's okay, that's not right, because we've got to get to the intellect of it. And so he very much got converted by the intellect. He is very real in the book about what his Christian journey looked like in being converted and after conversion, and how there are no promises that, hey, I'm a Christian, my life is going to be easy. And actually he got stomach cancer and died at a very young age. And so, I think some people would look at that and go, well,
you were wrong.
That's not cool. But he never, in all of this, he never said, oh, this was easy. Particularly in converting from Islam, he lost family, he lost friends, he lost his community. And he's very real about that. So, seeking Allah, finding Jesus, no God but one.
Yes. No God but one. We talked
breaks
about
it down
time.
much more specifically.
It's more
like,
intellect. This one is more narrative.
Oh, this one you could sit down to. Like we talked about the beach.
Yes.
You can sit on the beach and read this and feel good about this.
It's a good story.
No God but one breaks down. This is what Islam believes. This is what Christianity believes in this same realm. Like, why do they talk
Trinity?
about this?
Like, here's the Trinity. Here's what Islam believes about the Trinity. Here's what Christians believe.
It's really amazing.
This is how to talk. I love that too. This is how to talk to somebody that is a Muslim about this issue, because here's their hot points for this. Here's how to talk to them about it.
And it's not when you talk about the fight, it does let you kind of have that fighting spirit, and not like in a defensive, like I'm going to argue with you way, but like in a, I kind of understand now where this comes from.
Yeah.
So it's great apologetics.
Yeah.
You're next.
All right. My last one is, of course, MacArthur, because I can't not have MacArthur. This is probably one of my favorite ones by MacArthur, and it's one of his older ones, although he came up with a new revision of it later. It's called Ashamed of the Gospel, When the Church Becomes Like the World.
I'm just adding it to my Amazon cart. Don't keep going.
This one, it's funny the way he did this, because this book is very much based off of some Charles Spurgeon sermons. So every chapter he does this section of a Charles Spurgeon sermon, and then John MacArthur goes into more detail about it and applies it to like now. So a lot of the stuff that we're seeing about the church conforming to the world, Spurgeon was able to call this centuries ago.
Right.
Yeah.
If you know your Bible, you go, hey, this is happening.
Right. And so the best way to sum this up, this is one too, yes, I have a lot of underlines, but this book has a ton of underlines and notes in it for me. It was very eye-opening to me, and I think this is one of those books that we all need to read, because the Bible tells us that we need to self-examine, and I truly believe it's not just ourselves that we need to self-examine. We need to self-examine the churches that we're in. Am I in a biblical church? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be? Are we teaching what we're supposed to be teaching? My Sunday school class, is it a biblical lesson? Is it, those kinds of things? We need to make sure we're not slipping into pragmatism.
Well, and are we being biblical?
Right.
Like, not you and me, like pointing the two of us, but like what we're saying and what we think we have gathered.
Right.
Is that true?
Right. So the best way to really kind of sum it up is, I was going to read this section, and it's mainly because it starts with, if you take one lesson from this book, let it be this. And I told Abby, I was like, that sounds like a good place to sum it up. It says, the church needs to get back to the Word of God. Scripture alone can give life and bring sanctification to a sinful soul. Scripture alone can fully equip us to discern between truth and error. Only by returning to the Bible and submitting to its truth can the church recover what she needs to resist the lure of the world's fads and ever-changing philosophies, to confront the world with life-changing truth, and to keep our message pure and accurate. So this whole book really is about how to decipher whether or not you're getting
True.
20th century, 21st century
Biblical truth.
crap and philosophy, or I know I just said crap, sorry, but that's just the best way to sum that up.
said crap.
Paul said dung in the Bible. I'm fine. Anyway, so this is just a really good book to kind of discern, am I hearing what the world is saying or what the Bible actually says? And it always, as we have always done with our class, always goes back to the Word of God. So this is something Spurgeon, he referred to it as, he called it the downgrade. So that's a word you're going to see in here a lot. And it was Spurgeon's warning to the church in England of the downgrade that he began to see happen when they were letting the world in. I think I said this one time in my Acts videos, but if y'all seen the movie, tell me the name of it, Hugh Jackman, The Circus.
The Greatest Showman.
Greatest Showman. Okay, so he played P.T. Barnum or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Fun fact, did you know this? P.T. Barnum lived at the same time as Charles Spurgeon, and he knew that Charles Spurgeon was the Prince of Preachers, and he drew in thousands of people to his church to hear him preach. So P.T. Barnum sent a telegram to Charles Spurgeon and said, hey, will you come preach at my circus, and I'll give you so much money? And Spurgeon sent him literally all it was a verse from Acts back, and I can't remember, I'd have to look it up, but it was a verse that said, you foolish person, you are of the devil, the word of God cannot be bought, or something like that. And that was his response. So if you think John MacArthur is really rough and tumble, then Charles Spurgeon was a lot worse. All right.
So last but not least, Respectable Sins. This is by Jerry Bridges. I actually bought another book by Jerry Bridges when we went to Lifeway because I had read this. My kind of disclaimer here is don't buy this book for somebody else.
So which is what I did because I bought
which is fine. She bought this book for me for Christmas, but it is so convicting that you have to, if you do in fact buy it for somebody else, or if someone else gives it to you,
make sure you tell
or if
them.
you like borrow it from me, you don't go, Abby
talking
gave
to
me this so that I would understand what she thought about me. It's not about you. It's not about me.
I had not read it when I gave it to her. It's still on my bookshelf.
So Respectable Sins, in summary, is about what we as Christians have allowed to be acceptable as sin. And that we have so watered down these things that we no longer view them as sin.
Name some.
No longer...
Name some.
Okay, I'm ready. Y'all ready? These killed me. I'm just going to go through a bunch of
We're
them.
probably all guilty of every single chapter.
Unthankfulness, discontentment, anxiety and frustration, pride, selfishness, lack of self-control, impatience and irritability, anger, and we talked about this last time. He flat out says in here, you are not allowed to be angry with God.
And think about Jonah.
Yes,
Jonah was angry with God.
and you're not allowed to be angry with God.
Yeah.
He does not say you cannot talk to God. You cannot say, God, I'm really frustrated with this situation or what's happening and I don't understand. But you're actually not allowed to be angry with God. And so if somebody says to you at some point in time, well, it's okay to be angry with God, that is incorrect. Judgmentalism. Envy, I wasn't pointing to you, I was just saying. Envy, jealousy, related sins of the tongue. So this is slander, gossip. This is where us women tear it up. Well, he talks about in here that one of the things of sins of the tongue is I can't look at Marcy and say, hey, I really need you to pray for so-and-so because this is going on in their life.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, that's gossip.
Right?
It just is. Worldliness, and this kind of goes back to what you're talking about in the church, is that we don't get to fit in with the world.
Someone's coming downstairs.
Yeah, we're going to see who it is. Hello.
Oh, Daddy's going to work.
You're in charge now.
Bye.
At 9.
And then it kind of closes with where do we go from here? And I loved it because it talks about like, okay, well, you've named all these sins and you've made me feel horrible, which is what it does. But what do you do about that? And I haven't done it yet, but in the back of the book there, it's actually every session or every chapter has verses and questions and true study. Like you could read this, I read it, and then kind of go back and reread it and then go, okay, I'm going to dig deeper into this.
Okay.
So I loved it. And actually, do you know that J.I. Packer wrote on the back of this. Read
Jeez
this book.
Louise.
We need to and be ready for a gentle surgeon's sharp
Yes.
knife. Respectable Sins, Jerry Bridges. Actually, probably one of my most favorites that I've read recently.
I had no idea J.I. Packer was all over these books.
All over all the books.
So those are our books. We finally finished. Those are the books that we have read that we hope that you do read.
Yes.
I'm glad that I've gotten several of you guys have called me or texted me saying that you were really glad to watch these videos. I think Shannon was like, at the last video when I started doing this and I said, "You are not David." She was like, "Oh, I miss you yelling like that."
She can do it more, guys. Just call.
I don't know. We'll talk about maybe doing future videos for something in the future. I don't really know what that looks like.
I mean, I think
If you have an
whatever it looks
idea, let us know. And it doesn't have to be Abby. It can be anybody. We can bring more people in here
please.
and do some other stuff. I don't know. We'll have to talk about it. We'll have to figure that out. So
Love y'all.
until then, we'll